So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you all about teacher retention today, to have a great conversation with you and to talk about teacher retention and what we can do about it here in DC. So to start with, just the lay of the land of kind of what we're going to do for the next hour and a half. So to start, we're just going to give some perspective of what the state of teacher turnover and retention is in the district, look at some research, talk about what an agenda is to holistically tackle the issue. And then finally, I'm actually going to demonstrate a little bit about what Empower Ed does in our school-based work that kind of works backwards from the root causes and problems that we're looking at and challenges at the beginning to how we actually address that at the school-based level in addition to the policy level. So we're going to start with just that kind of broad overview. I'm going to encourage everyone, since I'll be presenting for a little while at the beginning, to please use the chat actively, ask questions, respond to things that are being said, talk amongst yourselves, and I'll try to respond as I go. And then I will stop if it seems like there's a point that we should dive deeper into. And then when we're done with that presentation part, it's going to be really interactive in the second half, where you're all going to kind of experiment with and play with the things that we do with our school, so you can actually see how it works interactively. So I'm going to jump in with that to sharing my screen and start our conversation today. Let me make sure this is sharing sound. There we go. All right. So again, the purpose is really to look at how teacher retention plays out in action. So the first thing we're going to look at today is why we should be looking at the challenge of teacher retention, which is a challenge everywhere, but something that we particularly are grappling with in DC, and there's been a lot of interest in. How we should look at it holistically. And one of the keys to that is looking at retention as a whole school issue, right? And thinking about retention in terms of the impact it has on a school's community and stability. And so our foundational belief here is that school stability and trust, whether that's between students and teachers, the teachers and their school, the school and their families, teachers and school leaders, all of those things are critical building blocks to sustainable school success. That it's really hard for a school to institute new initiatives and carry them out successfully for school improvement if it does not rest on the foundation of relational trust, and if we don't have stability, right? If we're turning over staff every year, if we're turning over principals, it's really hard to build on success over time and to not have to kind of go back to square one with school improvement. So everything else that a school does really depends on getting this right. We're going to start with a little talk. We're going to watch about a 4-minute video here about why we should be thinking about retention about everyone, and not just perhaps what we sometimes do is retention of a certain teachers within a group, but why we should be thinking about every employee, and how instead of kind of hiring and firing, we can actually get the best out of the people we have. So I'll start with this video inspiration, and then we'll dive into our DC numbers.
Are not responsible. At the end of the day, great leaders are not responsible for the job. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the job. They're not even responsible for the results. I love talking to CEOs and say, what's your priority? And they put their hands on their hips all proudly and say, my priority is my customer. I'm like, really? You haven't talked to a customer in 15 years. There's no CEO on the planet responsible for the customer. They're just not. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the people who are responsible for the customer. I'll tell you a true story. A few months ago, I stayed at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. It is a wonderful hotel. And the reason it's a wonderful hotel is not because of the fancy beds. Any hotel can go and buy a fancy bed. The reason it's a wonderful hotel is because of the people who work there. If you walk past somebody at the Four Seasons and they say hello to you, you get the feeling that they actually wanted to say hello to you. It's not that somebody told them that you have to say hello to all the customers, say hello to all the guests, right? You actually feel that they care. Now, in their lobby, they have a coffee stand. And one afternoon, I went to buy a cup of coffee, and there was a barista by the name of Noah who was serving me. Noah was fantastic. He was friendly and fun, and he was engaging with me, and I had so much fun buying a cup of coffee, I actually think I gave 100% tip, right? He was wonderful. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, do you like your job? And without skipping a beat, Noah says, I love my job. And so I followed up. I said, what is it that the Four Seasons is doing that would make you say to me, I love my job? And without skipping a beat, Noah said, throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, if there's anything that I need to do my job better. He said, not just my manager, any manager. And then he said something magical. He says, I also work at Caesar's palace. And at Caesar's palace, the managers are trying to make sure we're doing everything right. They catch us when we do things wrong. He says, when I go to work there, I like to keep my head under the radar and just get through the day so I can get my paycheck. He says, here at the Four Seasons, I feel I can be myself. Same person, entirely different experience from the customer who will engage with Noah. So we in leadership are always criticizing the people. We're always saying, we got to get the right people on the bus. I've got to fill my team. I got to get the right people. But the reality is it's not the people. It's the leadership. If we create the right environment, we will get people like Noah at the Four Seasons. If we create the wrong environment, we will get people like Noah at Caesar's palace. It's not the people. And yet we're so quick to hire and fire. You can't hire and fire your children. If your kids are struggling, we don't say, you got to see at school, you're up for adoption. So why is it that when somebody has performance problems at work, why is it that our instinct is to say, you're out? We do not practice empathy. What does empathy look like? Here's the lack of empathy. This is normal in our business world. You walk into someone's office, someone walks into our office and says, your numbers have been down for the third quarter in a row. You have to pick up your numbers, otherwise I can't guarantee what the future will look like. How inspired do you think that person is to come to work the next day? Here's what empathy looks like. You walk into someone's office, someone walks into your office and says, your numbers are down for the third quarter in a row. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. What's going on? We all have performance issues. Maybe someone's kid is sick. Maybe they're having problems in their marriage. Maybe one of their parents is dying. We don't know what's going on in their lives. And of course it will affect performance at work. Empathy is being concerned about the human being, not just their output. We have, for some reason, our work world has changed over the past 20 and 30 years. We are suffering the side effects of business theories left over from the 80s and 90s. And they are bad for people, and they are bad for business.
All right, so we're going to stop it there. It goes on. For those who are interested.
At the end of the day, great leaders.
Simon Sinek is his name. If you are not familiar with him, I highly encourage you to look at more. He's kind of a leadership guru. But let's kind of start with that idea, right? That we should be looking at all of our employees together, right? That what's important is kind of school level stability, organizational level stability. And so if you look at where we are now, anywhere from 25, this was on the State Board of Education report, or the OSCE report said 30% annual school turnover. If you look at a national average for urban schools, 16% is the most recent figure in an average. So you can see we're well above that mark. Now that's all teachers, right? Leaving their school each year. Now, what about our 40 lowest performing schools? We used to call this 40-40 back in the day, but if you look at that same subset of schools, 33% is the average turnover rate. If you look at schools with the same at-risk population as those 40 schools, national average is around 20% annual turnover. And the final thing is, are we losing just the teachers we label highly effective or effective? We've looked at why that's a problematic view, but if you look at that, even 52% of the teachers who have left in the past years have been effective or highly effective over the past 5 years. Now, we have strong retention, as many have pointed out, year to year with that group, right? So if you look at highly effective teachers, we're retaining about 90 or more % of them each year. But over the second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, we're losing those teachers, even those who are labeled highly effective by our evaluation system. So starting with some myths. Turnover in DC is not higher because of transients, right? So you look at a place like LA or New York, both cities are actually higher in transients than DC is, and have lower levels of teacher turnover. The second, teachers are leaving are not just ineffective. So again, this is something, we've heard a lot in this conversation, but the reality is, especially over that 3 to 5 year range, we're losing them. But also the most important thing, and something I hope you got from that talk, is that the developing teachers, right, become effective. Effective teachers become highly effective. It takes time, right, to get good at the practice. The third thing is the setback to school initiatives and relationships overall, right? So relationships are key. Schools are human places. They're built on relationships. Relational trust is the key to school success. There's a lot of research on that. And so the setback to school initiatives and relationships is significant, even if we're not just talking about those we've said are the most effective teachers. And the fourth, we need more research on this before we act. Another myth, right? We've actually been studying this for a very long time. We have a lot of data on turnover and retention in DC. We're more than ready to implement solutions. We know what works. We're not the first city to struggle with this issue or to need solutions on retention. And no matter where you're looking, is it the novice teacher? Is it retaining the highly effective and effective teachers? Is it retaining educators of color? Schools have dealt with these, systems have dealt with this for a long time, and we know what works. The next thing is, this is really, really expensive, right? To lose the amount of teachers that we lose. And there's a lot of research on the cost there, but I'll just note the numbers in DC. So if you look at that top number, the top bar there, this is based on the Learning Policy Institute's calculator for teacher turnover. On the top there is DC over 5 years. They estimate that it costs about $20,000 per teacher when you're losing that teacher from a school. And the total cost of that turnover, this is DC's, right, over that 5-year period is 112 million. Now, if we were to bring our turnover level, overall turnover, down to the average, down to 16%, the cost would have been 72 million instead. In other words, we could have saved $40 million over the past 5 years if we had average turnover, not eliminating turnover. There's always going to be some. If we just had average turnover, we could have saved $40 million over 5 years. And think about the amount of things we want to do for those who are in the policy arena that cost $40 million or less. So State Board of Education, and I appreciate some of the state board reps that are on the call with us today. State Board has done a lot of research on turnover over time. 4 key drivers they've identified in their research. 1, the culture created by evaluation systems like Impact as a top driver. Teachers feeling frustrated or scared, the lack of positive relationships with administrators, a lack of teacher voice in decision-making, and then burnout on work-life balance, and that manifests in different kind of comments that we've seen in some of the state board survey work. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time going into this, but we will share it with everyone, which is, this is our kind of 6-bucket agenda to solve the teacher retention challenge, building on research about what we know works. So the first is data and transparency. Yes, we know enough about what the problem is now, but we need continuous data. So this SBOE Data Warehouse Amendment Act, which is legislation before the council, was introduced and had a hearing last time, but did not get a vote, would make sure we have current year-to-year information on a lot of the teacher statistics we need. Second is we need a universal exit survey, which isn't part of that legislation, but could be, which is that across both DCPS and charter schools, we have a universal exit survey that's instituted every year. We have up-to-date and crosswalked information about why teachers are leaving. The second bucket is improving the teacher-admin relationship. This is a lot of what we work on in our school-based work that we'll share soon, and building shared leadership models. And then making sure principals have really good professional development on shared leadership, teacher wellness, and working conditions. On reforming teacher evaluation and PD, we also have a lot of research about alternative models here. So Montgomery County and many other big districts use something called peer assistance and review. It's a more 360-degree system, and it's a growth-based rather than a punitive-based tool. So it is focused not as much on accountability, although obviously it is about accountability, but it is about accountability for the purpose of growth rather than just for the purpose of evaluation or for hiring and firing. And finally, personalized goals. And I'll talk about what floating PD means, but a lot of what we do in our work is asset-based, so asset mapping with schools to make sure they're taking the full advantage of the expertise on their staff, which also empowers staff members and helps retain them. Fourth, we can spend in the right places. So we know, and there's a lot of research on this, the more we spend and invest in paraprofessionals and social workers, school psychologists, the more support that provides holistically to students, but also that takes the burden off the classroom teacher and helps retention all around. Minimum salary in the charter sector, we'll talk about why that's important in a minute. And then bonuses, which we'll take up, has been a big part of our approach, but I want to look at research about why that might not be effective in our particular context. And then supporting career ladders. So new teacher mentorships are always very important. And then teacher leadership beyond. So we often do teacher leadership when it comes to instructional models, right? So there's teacher leadership when it comes to being a department chair, for example, but not particular opportunities in building school culture and improving attendance and a lot of other areas. And then leadership opportunities for educators of color. So, we've seen many, many times in survey results. For example, there was one that was analyzed a couple years ago from DCPS exit surveys. And what they found is leadership, teachers of color in particular said one of the top reasons for leaving was a lack of leadership opportunities. Flexible scheduling, also really important. And that is something that's done, kind of more commonly in the charter sector, but really can be done anywhere. And especially helps to retain teachers who become new parents, and a focus on educators of color. And we'll talk more about what that looks like. So what about the money aspect? So this is obviously always part of the conversation as well, right? Teacher salaries adjusted for cost of living. So we talk a lot about how DC has some of the highest teacher salaries in the country. That is absolutely true, right, on actual pay. But if you look at cost of living, there's DC at number 21, right, down on the list. So you have to account for cost of living, right? People have to be able to afford to live here, to work here, and that's the actual real rate of pay. So that's just on the DCPS side. On the charter side, half of DC charter schools actually have a starting salary. Their low salary, which they actually report every year in their annual reports, that's below a living wage. And you can see that the index that's based on. So that means, and I don't know if you can see the full left side, but there's a lot of schools that have starting salaries. If you look at the minimum column, and I'm happy to share this table, but you can all access the public reports as well, that start at $25,000, $27,000, $29,000, $30,000 a year, which is below a living wage to be able to afford a studio apartment to live in DC. Now, bonuses, there's a lot of research on the effectiveness of bonuses. They can have positive effects in certain contexts, but what the research shows pretty clearly is once you hit a certain salary, bonuses are no longer effective. But what that means is if people are getting paid really low wages, bonuses can help retain them, right? And it's bringing their overall wage up. But if you actually have decent wages, which is fair to say, at least in DCPS, we have more than decent wages. Beyond a certain point, what keeps people is not an extra $1,000, $5,000, or $10,000, right? Once they have a sufficient salary, the working conditions are a much more important factor in retention than additional money once you get beyond a certain point. And since we are beyond that point in most of our schools in DC, bonuses are not a really cost-effective approach. This is another thing from Simon Sinek, and there's a talk on this, but I won't share the whole thing right now. But what's really interesting about it is this is a graph actually from the Navy SEALs. And what he shares in this talk is this is the graph they use to determine who are the kind of elite Navy SEALs, who's SEAL Team 6. And if you look at the graph, there's performance on one side, trust on the other side. What this shows is that if someone is high, obviously what we want is high performance, high trust individuals, but they would much rather have, according to the Navy SEALs, a medium performance and high trust person or a low performance and high trust person than a high performance and low trust person, right? So what they're looking for is someone that can really be trusted, that they know, this is a person that has your back, has their colleagues' back, that can be counted on, that is good interpersonally, that is good with relationships. That trust is even more important than the high performance. They'd rather low performance and high trust than high performance and low trust for the people they retain. Performance is really important, but the key to working in teams, which education is absolutely about teams, right, is trust more than performance on its own. We want high performance and high trust, but if you have to choose, right, at least this military approach says, what's more important is retaining those that people rely on, that we have high trust in. Now, a couple more things, and then we're going to broaden it out to a little discussion, Q&A, and then get into what our work looks like. So we have this approach called floating professional development. What does this look like? So I taught in a charter school a long time ago where we did something a little bit like this. Every teacher got a certain budget during the year. This is kind of an extended version of it for professional development. They set their own particular goals. They worked with the principal, assistant principals, instructional coach to set their goals on where they wanted to improve. And then what they did was allowed for those teachers to observe organically, find teachers who were really good at the skills where they needed to improve, form organic mentor relationships with those educators, and spend time watching them. So instead of spending a lot of time in uniform professional development, right, something that might be written by central office or at the school level, that they actually allowed teachers to use a significant amount of professional development time to just go watch teachers that were really good at the things that they said they need work on. And that's essentially what floating professional development means. It could be done at the school level, or even you can get more creative and allow time. Some schools have half day on Wednesdays. That's something a lot of folks have thought about this year with how we could creative that past the pandemic, since we've experienced the asynchronous Wednesdays this year, where people could actually go observe at other schools in the future. But it's a really effective tactic, and it allows you to form organic mentor relationships. Mentors are really important, especially for novice teachers, but there's also research that says that most mentorship programs, centrally designed, fail. And the reason is we create kind of arranged marriages, right? We're pairing a really experienced teacher that administration says is great with a new novice teacher, but there's nothing organic about that relationship, and they'd rather be learning from the person in the classroom next to them that they have a great relationship with. So if you do a floating professional development model, it marries those two things. You're focused on the expertise, you're focused on where the teacher needs to grow, but the mentorship relationship happens more organically. And then finally, the focus on educators of color, which we've spent a lot of time on. You can see over a 10-year period on the left, DC, you can see at the bottom, had the largest drop in Black teachers and the largest gain in white teachers of any of the city measures. Now, this was up to 5 years ago. So that drop is has stabilized a little bit, but we experienced a huge drop over a period of 10 years. And you can see that's even a little bit higher in the drop in Black teachers than New Orleans, which had a massive shift in their public education system after Hurricane Katrina. And now we still have better teacher diversity, right, than they have in most cities in the country. And the reason for that is, unfortunately, that first of all, we had the good part is we had a population where we had a really high percentage of Black teachers and a really high percentage of Black students. But as the Black teaching population has declined, so has the Black student population in the city. And so we still have pretty good parity there, although it could be better. Where we have huge gaps is in our Latinx population. And so this is the number from the OSSE Teacher Workforce Report. And then you can see here our own analysis of this. So look at the gaps in the Latinx population, where Ward 1, you have this huge gap. Ward 4, you have a huge gap between Latinx students and teachers. And then this is the gap between Black students and Black teachers, where you still have some pretty large gaps in places like Wards 5 and 6. And so regrounding us in these solutions we looked at, what we're going to actually do now is, what does this look like in action? What does it look like to actually solve these problems? Looking at the data, looking at the research, knowing what we need to solve, what does it look like to actually approach this on a school by school level? Before we do that, I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions. Feel free to use the chat or to just call something out loud. And then I am going to share this presentation and encourage folks, when they are able, to come on camera. And we are going to, if you are able, if you're not, that's totally fine. But I'm going to share this presentation so that you can actually use the presentation yourself as a workbook as we dive into this. Any questions? And everyone can open that link I posted in the chat. I want to introduce quickly Nicole Baum, who is one of our two co-chairs of our Teacher Retention Committee and is a teacher at Capital City. Nicole, if you want to say hi.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for spending time here and not outside, like I think a lot of us want to be, maybe.
Yes, yes. Any questions about what we've talked about so far?
I'd like to mention two things, Scott.
Yes.
One thing is on that TED Talk is that it should filter down to teachers and students, because I think the most successful teachers know what is happening in their students' lives. And but there are a lot of teachers that don't know what's happening in their students' lives, just as there are a lot of principals that don't know what's happening in their teachers' lives, or teachers that don't know what's happening in their principals' lives. And the other thing is about mentorship is that this organization needs to be lifting their voices to try to get, I mean, as a veteran teacher, since I retired, I've been screaming to try to be able to mentor new teachers through DCPS. And my screams have been unanswered.
Yeah.
And I'm getting much older now, and I'm still ready to talk to new teachers or talk to AP teachers or whatever, but it's all been on deaf ears.
I will say we do have folks from DCPS here, and I do know one of the new investments in teacher retention is a mentorship program for novice teachers. I don't know how that's going to be set up, and someone can feel free to, if there are answers now, but I do know that's something they're working on, targeted at novice teachers with a new investment. Any other questions or thoughts?
Scott, this is Ruth, and I have a question about relating teacher retention to school accountability, and I think that's not a good question to put right now, but I just want you to know that that's in my mind.
Yeah, and anything we put in accountability, right? As we know, there's incentives and disincentives both ways, right? Are we creating a perverse incentive in how we measure something to artificially inflate numbers, that kind of thing, right? And so there's a whole conversation there. But in some ways, it is, if you look at what families want to know, and OSSE did a lot of research on this before they launched the STAR report, right? Teacher characteristics was the number one thing they were hearing, right? And so retention is part of that, but it's also teacher experience, teacher diversity, and things like that. Any other thoughts before we keep going? All right, so everyone should have access to this. And what I'm gonna show you is some of the activities we actually do with schools to address this. So Fraser said something really important, which is it is also about the teachers understanding what is going on in the principals' lives, right? Empathy goes in both directions, right? And building great relationships between teachers and principals and administrators, building shared leadership is not a one-way street. And so the work we do is absolutely grounded in building relational trust and empathy throughout a staff, right? Throughout a school staff, because as we said, schools are human organizations and they fundamentally depend on having great relational trust in each relationship, student to teacher, teacher to administrator, family to school. And so one of the things we do early on, right, in our workshops is Maslow's hierarchy, where we have teachers doing it for principals, principals doing it for teachers, instructional coaches doing it for school psychologists, et cetera, right? So that's something that, is fundamental to it, right? Starting off from a place of there is no finger pointing, right? Building relational trust is a 360-degree process. So if you want to all look at, so I'm going to show you what is on slide number 20, and then I'll ask for us to each do this together, and we'll go through a few of the activities we do during these workshops. So what you're looking at here is one of the activities we do on identity early on in our work. So this is an actual example, taking out the name here, but what you can see is they have identity 1 and identity 2. Where we're asking you just two things that are really, really important to your identity. So that could be that you're a parent. You see Boricua here, right? So this person, their ethnic heritage being Puerto Rican was really a key part of their identity. And then we have them being a mother, right? And a wife being a really important part of their identity. And then you see past life and future life. So this person said they used to be president of a poetry society. In the future life, they want to be a bakery owner. Personal passion, something maybe their coworkers probably don't know about. And then something their coworkers, I should say coworkers probably know in the first one, and then coworkers probably don't know in the second one. So why are we asking for this information? when people can bring their whole selves to their work, they feel more fulfilled, right? That doesn't mean everything they do in their personal life they're going to start doing at their school, right, or in their work life, but it does mean that there might be a passion that they would love to bring in, an expertise that they have, a passion they have, they would love to bring in some way to their work. It's a way that they feel unfulfilled, that they would love to share with their colleagues, that they would love to share with their students. And if we could just bring some light to that, we could actually bring about more fulfillment, right, and self-efficacy in their actual daily work. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is pick a slide. So if you look at the next, I think I put 20 in there, from slide 21 going down, all you're going to do is pick a slide, write your name in there, and then fill out the bubbles. A couple of things that are important about your identity, something about your past life, something you might envision for your future life. And we mean the same lifetime, but maybe in future years. And then personal passion, coworkers probably know and don't know. And I'll give everyone 7 or 8 minutes to do this for themselves, and we'll share some observations. So you should be able to, that's great. And we'll share a little bit. Before we do that, I'm going to ask Principal Bork, Mr. Bork from Sella Public Charter School, who we're working with this year, since I know he has to run in a minute, just to share a little bit about what it's been like to do this work with Empower Ed this year, and why the school believes in shared leadership as a model.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be here. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to just say how interesting it's been to do this kind of work. So we've had a team composed of myself, our Director of Culture and Student Support Services, and 3 classroom teachers who've been working on sort of how we view the adult culture in the building. We've looked at it through the lens of PD. We've looked at it through the lens of institutional trust. And it's been a fun way to give these teachers sort of what you were talking about before, a little bit of a leadership role that's not exactly school leadership, to really make them feel like they're part of the decision-making process in the school and part of the sort of like the family in the school. So it's been really interesting for us. The teachers who have taken part in it have really taken those lessons back to the other staff. In normal years, we would have them lead some in-person PDs with big groups. Instead, we've been doing that virtually, which is not quite as effective, but is definitely an interesting experience. And all the teachers seem to really have enjoyed sort of like being able to talk about how we view the relationships we have in the building as adults with each other. So I think it's a really fun program for us, and I was glad that we were able to take part in it.
Thanks so much, Josh, and I appreciate you stopping by.
No problem.
Thank you so much. And we'll hear from another principal in a little while, but I want to just reflect a little bit on this activity. So is there, a couple things, any general reflections, but also as you did this for yourself, was there anything you thought, I'm putting in here a personal passion, something I did in a past life or I want to do in my future life, that, if I were a teacher, right, I could share, right, in some way outside of my normal classroom instruction. So any thoughts on that? Mikkel, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I loved yours there. So did you have any thoughts on it?
Just something that you can share. I mean, I just think if someone is able to share something in their past life, they may realize they have something in common with someone that they may not have expected to. So that can just be used as a bonding experience for them.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone else? Alistair, did I see you put reading for both?
Guilty. No. Hey, everyone. I mean, if we're reflecting on this, I think so much of my identity, and I think identity gets shaped by how other people perceive you, right? And I think this week I'm feeling particularly Asian, and I think people are reminding me that in the process, right? So just, I guess, highlighting that as a point around sort of how dynamic our identities are.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that.
How we relate to them.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that point up about not only dynamic identities, but the ways in which, current events and culture, right, can impact how, there's, when we have teachable moments, right, how we rely on having diversity in our staff. because without that firsthand experience to be able to share, it is hard to build not only understanding, but hard to build trust without understanding the parts of people's identities that are personal, that are upfront for them, and that they might not share right on a daily basis, but are really important to who they are, right? And important to them feeling valued, right, in their workplace. Any other thoughts on this process? So this is a starting point, and I'm going to go through a few of these other ones here to show what this looks like. So the next one, where do we go from there, right? So the next thing is, and these are just a few samples, but how do we actually evaluate, what we are feeling when we're feeling in this very general term that gets thrown around, burnout, right? When we're feeling burnt out, when we're feeling not trusted, when we're feeling disempowered, what is it that we're really feeling? And so, this has been particularly acute in this year for educators, not just for educators, but for everybody. And so, how do we actually analyze each of these things? So the first is, the work-life balance, lack of personal connection, lack of personal growth, and that manifests itself in teachers saying, I don't feel like there's leadership opportunities I can take advantage of. There's a lot of secondary trauma, right, for educators who are dealing with, and especially in this year, but always, caring for students, caring for others who are caring for others. And, that's a role that principals have to take on all the time, and teachers are taking on when students have such difficult, home environments. And we've seen that really on display. So this is just an activity where people are able to kind of express what is it they're feeling and where are they feeling solid, right? And they're able to identify these. Sometimes people do this in a really cool way, actually asking them to map it out, right? So which are they feeling the most, but also which are connected to others, right? Which of these feelings do they think are kind of a root cause, and what are they feeling are kind of branches, right, that are connected to that original root? And so once they're able to identify that, they're thinking as a group around which of those are kind of related to work culture, and how can they, as a group of mixed staff, right? And that's really key to what our model is. We have the principal in the same room as teachers and staff. How can they, as a mixed group of staff, actually identify the processes at the school-based level and the systems at the school-based level that contribute to or take away, right, from each of those, and how can we address them? We also talk about empowerment languages, right? And so everybody feels powerful in different ways. And so when we talk about empowering educators, that means a lot of different things to different people. And so these are a little bit about what we share about empowerment languages. For some people, like for myself, I feel powerful when I'm advocating for change, right? But that is not a way that all people feel powerful. For other people, a formal leadership role, a title might be really important. For some, just learning something that they've wanted to learn for a real long time is the way that they feel most powerful. For some, it is feeling vulnerable. It is not about what they share or what they're saying personally. It is about being in a space where they can be vulnerable with others that makes them feel powerful. So thinking about what your empowerment language is, and then mapping that up in some ways to power and privilege, right? In what ways does our own power, our own privilege influence how we feel powerful and what we need to feel empowered in our own work environments and in our personal lives? We also then look at autonomy and support, because when we talk about educators and we talk about, educators saying, I need more autonomy in my job, right? I don't need to turn in lesson plans every day. And on the other hand, we have educators that say, I need you to give me a curriculum, right? There are very different levels of autonomy and support needed based on where a teacher is in their career. And so one of the things we do with our school-based work is mapping that out. What areas of on an individual basis, what areas of your work do you need more autonomy in? And what areas do you need more support in? And this is just something that we don't normally take the time to map out in a school environment. And mapping it out and seeing where there is commonality among school staff is so critical in figuring out where the school can provide the scaffolds and additional supports, and where the school can decide to provide the flexibility. Now, a principal might not be able to tailor this to every single individual well all the time, but knowing this about their staff members, asking this question is empowering in itself. And then being able to look at where there is commonality among your staff members, you can start to differentiate professional development, right? We talk about differentiating for students all the time. We ask teachers to differentiate for students all the time. We also need to differentiate for adults. because a novice teacher and an experienced teacher are in very different parts of their career trajectory, and they need different amounts of flexibility. They need different amounts of support. And often what we find when we do this activity is that there's areas where the school, we do another kind of addendum to this, where we ask, what do you do formally at your school that you could do informally? And what do you do informally that you could do formally? And what we often find in that activity is, there are areas where the school can easily make a shift to making something more formal or informal. They just haven't had that conversation, right, around process. And sometimes that is a huge weight off a large group of teachers in their day. They finally have the hour they need to sit down and do their grading, to sit down and do their lesson planning, to actually implement the things that they've learned, right? And because one of the greatest things we hear from teachers is, I've had great professional development, I just never get the time to actually implement it, because it's always another professional development around the corner. And so actually mapping that out can make a big difference. So we're going to do one more that I'm going to ask everyone to participate in here. And I'm going to show an example on 44, and then we'll do those slides that follow there. So if you look at 44, this is what we would do with teachers, which is, and staff, who are 4 people in the building, right, who have an instructional expertise that you would like to learn from, and what is it? And then who are 4 people who have a non-instructional expertise? For example, they're really good at organization, they're really good at relationship building, that you would like to learn from, and who are they? So what we're going to do is think about that in your own context. And I'm going to ask you to do this instead of for fellow teachers, because not everyone is a teacher here, to do it for a colleague or friend. And we're going to, instead of doing instructional and non-instructional, I'm going to ask you to do skill expertise and content expertise. So pick a slide, and then you're going to fill out 4 colleagues or friends, what skills that they have that you would like to learn, and 4 friends who know something about a particular area of content that you'd like to learn from, and who those folks are. So I'll give folks 6 or 7 minutes here to pick a slide and fill in those things for yourself.
Sharing his apology note that he wrote to a classmate. I'm sorry, Wildcats, for spraying you. That's good, Nate. All right, I'll be right with you. Lucas, you're not the only one multitasking right now. That's good. I'll check in a few minutes, okay? You can close the door. No, I wasn't off mute. They heard that, but they didn't see you, so you're still anonymous. All right, close the door. See you in a bit. Where was I? Yeah, he made a mistake and he's making amends.
Yeah, just the belief in shared leadership.
Oh yeah, and we know that the best decisions are made collaboratively with differences of perspective and input, and so this cohort has allowed us the time and space to really hash out possible pathways forward on challenges we're facing as a school. It builds trust, and it leads to better decisions, and some practical applications of that have been the development of a teacher leadership sort of opportunity guide or catalog that we will roll out into next school year as we onboard new folks, for them to know how they can sort of plug in and develop themselves and the school. As well as in the fall, we'll be focusing with Scott on some teacher-led and staff-led professional learning, which we know is the most impactful, not top-down district level leadership, certainly, and not even top-down school level PD, but really PD that's role embedded and collaboratively developed and led by teacher teams. So those are some things that we've been focused on, and really excited about the work and what's to come.
Thanks for managing all that. I appreciate you stopping by.
Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. Thank you. Yeah. So Courtney, can I ask you, because you mentioned in there leading on their strengths, I think you mean leaning on their strengths, and kind of what your observation was on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially during this virtual world, it's very much so important to identify where individual strengths or areas of growth are, and really just leaning on that, especially during this time of remote working and learning. I'm just thinking from my office perspective, understanding, who is a great public speaker, who's great in coalition building. That's just very much so important. And also leaning on those individuals to then help those individuals that may have that area as an area of growth. So finding ways to do that in the office as well as during this virtual world as well.
Appreciate that. And in both this asset mapping type of work, which is a pretty basic concept, right? It's something, it's really important no matter if you're in a school, in a business, any kind of organization, but also the floating professional development model we talked about earlier. What that is about at its core is not only the feeling empowered in your own role, but being able to share those things across roles in the most effective way so the team, right, works best as a unit. And so that's what all of that work is getting at. But the other thing it allows you to do is to not focus on your challenges or weaknesses, right? Focus on your strengths. And when everyone is focusing on their strengths and is matched to the people who have a strength where they have a challenge, right, where naturally everyone is improving. And that is that process of making sure the teachers who we say, are in a stage of development, right, or effective, or moving from developing to effective to highly effective, they're getting more advanced at their practice, they're becoming better educators, and we're focused on growth, right? And so, these are real things. And that's what I want to kind of demonstrate today, which is there's real concrete ways to actually do this work, right? If we know that people are saying they don't have enough leadership opportunities, if we know that teachers are saying we don't have enough voice in the school environment, these are not abstract concepts. They're actually very concrete things that we know how to address, right? And that there's work that we can do to build trust. There's a really good, kind of philosophy, right, on trust, that trust is not something that happens instantaneously, right? There's no single thing you do and then you are trusted, right? Trust is something that is built up over thousands and thousands of daily and minute by minute interactions with other people, right? And there's nothing that can replace the consistency of gaining trust with one big swift act, right? Trust has to be gained through consistency over time, being able to be counted on over time. And the only way we can do that is if we rely on people for what they're good at, we appreciate them for what they're good at, we show them and expect them to grow, and then we applaud them for that growth, right? And when we do that in a school-based environment, people not only feel supported, they grow in their profession, they serve students better, the school serves families better. So these are real concrete things that we know how to do. Any other thoughts before we move on to a couple final things? So the final things I want to show is, so this is actually, I don't know if this, there we go. So a draft professional learning mission statement. So each of our schools that we're working with, they're working with 5 schools this year. We've done that over the past few years, is developing a draft professional learning mission statement, so that we're working backwards from what is it we're trying to accomplish with professional learning, with professional development, to how do we make sure all of staff is involved in delivering that, feels part of it, and feels that it's appropriately differentiated for them, right, at their level with their needs, so that they can grow. And when we do all this work put together, when we build relational trust, when we work on shared leadership, when we make sure that we've mapped out our assets, that we take advantage of all the expertise in the building, we see results. So these are just some data here, right? So through our workshops, this is over the past 2 years that we've been measuring this in our pilots with, I think it's 8 schools now. 100% have said the PD is a valuable use of their time, and 80% have said that doing the partnership with EmpowerEd and doing this work has made them more likely to stay at their school. And you can see a little bit of what the comments are in terms of how it's been helpful. But as you can see in my urging you to be active and engaged and interactive today, this is interactive and engaging. Everybody is involved in the process. As Principal Kiplinger said, they're developing at each of the 5 schools we're working with this year. Actually, they're developing some level, right, of professional development plan, right, that is shared at a staff level. And it is hopefully the kind of professional development that feels tailored enough to them, because they are exploring their own needs, they're exploring their own expertise, that they feel engaged in it, that they want to follow up with it, that they want to share it with their colleagues. And so I will stop there. And I just want to go back, as we finish off here to, where we started with the agenda, which is this, right? We know what the research says about the teacher retention challenge we have as a city. We know there's a lot of things we need to address it. And there's some that have to happen at a policy level, which is why I appreciate we've had over the course of this afternoon, folks, both at the school level and the policy level. But we also know there's real concrete work we can do at the school level. And I will say, you know, we've had a lot of investments, more investments over time in this work in the past year or two, not in our work, but in teacher retention as a city, where we saw a period kind of disinvestment. And now we're starting to spend money on it again. But we spent an enormous amount of money on things like bonuses and not a whole lot of money on things like shared leadership practices, on teacher and staff empowerment, on things that we know from research, like building relational trust, actually make teachers more likely to stay, right? And so what we really want to encourage is for policymakers, for principals, for everybody to be focused on the research-based solutions that we know will actually improve teacher retention. Because we know when people feel heard, when they feel respected, when they feel valued, they're more likely to stay. And the difference between earning $60,000 and $70,000 a year is not as big of a difference, though money is important, right? But once you hit that bar, what the research shows is the bigger difference is working conditions and feeling valued. And we have to start moving our investments there if we want to ultimately bring down turnover and make sure we're keeping all of our teachers. So I'll stop there and see if there's any concluding thoughts. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I will send a follow-up to everyone who came over the course of the afternoon, and I will share some of the slide deck. You should have the slide deck actually, because we shared it in the chat. If you want to use some of that information, I'll share it in the follow-up as well as information about how you can be more involved and what you view as a way you can play a role from your own positions. So appreciate it, and go enjoy the weather. Thanks, everybody.